What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dentists Who Invest podcast. This is a podcast I've been meaning to do for absolutely ages because we've done pensions to death, but we've never done SSAS pensions specifically. And I have sat here in front of me Paul Barry, who is the expert on everything to do with SSAS pensions. And if you don't know what a SSAS pension is or what that acronym stands for, don't worry, we've got you covered because that is actually something that we're going to talk about today in the podcast. That is the main point and the main reason that we're here. But before we do that, how are you today, Paul?
I'm very well, James. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast. Always a delight to share information with other like-minded professionals. So cool. Really appreciate the time and thank you for letting me on.
Hey man, it's cool. Like I say, we've been meaning to do this for absolutely ages, and here we are, 220-ish episodes, and we've never quite got around to it. And there's a little bit of a metaphor in there for life, isn't there? If you just have to go and do something, or it's literally years later before it actually happens. So here we are today. We're going to sort that. Well, anyway, Paul, let's start from the start. That seems sensible. What is a SSAS pension?
Which is a great question. And a question I'm asked very often. So basically, the acronym stands for Small Self-Administered Scheme. And that basically means that the small means it's for SME business owners like you and I. Self-administered means it's a pension that we control, so we own it and direct it and a full autonomy over it. And scheme just means it's a pension. So it's a pension scheme designed specifically for UK SME business owners, which is pretty much everyone that we're talking to on the podcast here today, which is convenient. So just, I guess maybe put some context to that, James. So SSAS was established way back in 1973. So it's been around for 51 years, I guess, arithmetic is correct. And the whole point of it really was back then that HMRC, or Inland Revenue, they were back in those days, figured that you and I as business owners are taking and making decisions every day of our lives that affect our livelihood. So therefore, why wouldn't we have the ability to do it with a pension and essentially give, I suppose, some credibility or control back to business owners because we're taking that, we have that position with our business. And essentially what that meant was that you could then pretty much connect your pension to your business and run the two of them in tandem or indeed together in many cases, and really just give full control and autonomy to that structure, because most people want that because as business owners, that's what we have every day in all aspects of our life. So why would you not about the pension? So that's essentially what SSAS did, was to bring those elements together, which for most of us as business owners, that is what we need, because that's how we function, that's how we make our living, that's how we make our profits, and that's how we feed our families and improve our lifestyles and everything else, because we need that control, right? Because if we don't have that, then what have we actually got? So I should also warn you, James, I've got a habit of talking quite a lot, so feel free just to cut me off.
You're all good. We're going to be a good match then in that case, mate, because I tend to do that a lot as well. So all good. But no, I was listening with intent just then about what you were saying. Was there more to that, or was that pretty much
No, I think that, yeah, so the purpose of it, so it is a small self-administered scheme. It's for business owners and pretty much to give you control. And that's the main kind of that's what it actually is. And I guess kind of thinking then that's great, but what is the purpose of that? And so why have it at all? So
could I just jump in just before we talk about what the purpose of it is, just to go back to the small business that we were talking about just a second ago, small business owners. How would we define small business? I think is it under 50 employees is the definition? What's the definition of that again?
Yeah, there's a number. So yeah, some people define it on turnover, some people define it on employee numbers. It's pretty much a combination of both. But well, in that context, all of my clients have a turnover of probably less than 15, 20 million, and they have variable employees from themselves to probably a couple hundred. So there's not really an actual definition. HMRC have their own definition of that, of course. But pretty much everyone who's got a business that's probably turnover less than 20 million quid is essentially an SME. So most businesses in the UK, so I think there are 5.5 million businesses in the UK. I think something like 4.5 million fall into this category. And from memory, I don't quote me the numbers exactly, but it's in that kind of order. So obviously there's corporates and much bigger institutions out there who are not in this space, but SMEs are, well, it's a small, medium-sized enterprise, I guess, is what it stands for. So not corporate, I guess.
Yeah, and that would be definitely the majority of dental practices then would fall into that category. Okay, cool. Well, anyway, sorry, before I barged in, just then you were just about to explain what it's for and how it operates, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of purpose of it really is I probably mentioned this in the first bit, is is to give you control as a business owner of all of the value within a pension structure. Now, you may already have a pension structure, and you can indeed consider moving that into a SSAS if that's something you want to do. We can talk about that in much more detail on a one-to-one. But the point of it really is to give you the ability to determine exactly how the money in your pension is invested, and to then use structures and methods in that process that you're probably not familiar with generally in pension world, because the SSAS gives specific things. I'll talk about in a second, that give you the flexibility to do things that you just couldn't do in other pension structures. And the kind of headlines of those are things like you can lend money to other businesses, to your own business, for example, and you can buy commercial premises, and you can pretty much invest in anything you want to that is HMRC approved. But fundamentally, the point of that is to, I guess, connect a source of capital and a source of value and a source of wealth that you've got somewhere else that's currently not connected to your business, and you can bring that into that same environment and use it productively to help grow your pension structure and to help you grow and advance your business all at the same time. And it's kind of like two gears that connect that you wouldn't typically have, because you'd have one separate and the other kind of sitting somewhere else alongside of it. So it's really about connectivity and control, the main kind of things.
Fascinating. So what I'm hearing is that it's money in a pension, but it's not necessarily completely 100% tied up like it is in a conventional pension.
Yeah,
There's some
exactly.
accessibility there.
Correct. No, you're right. It's a really good way to kind of to summarize it. So if you imagine, and we've all had this, or indeed may still have this, where you have a pension that you've paid money into historically, or you're still doing it right now, and you place that with a big investment manager. There's hundreds of them out there. Let's just use an example, say Aviva or Standard Life or whatever. There are hundreds of them, obviously, and you trust that business to invest your money. You pay them, regularly or infrequently, and you give them the money, and they aim to make you a return on that money. They may do that, they may not do that. It might be neutral, it might be disastrous, it might be absolutely brilliant. But that's what you essentially give, is the control of that to a third party. And there's nothing wrong with that, incidentally. And you can absolutely do that inside of a SSAS as well. But it's just a different way of doing it. So it's a bit like almost being self-employed or employed. Having a pension like that is almost like being an employee. The whole structure set up for you, you need to kind of function within it. But you're self-employed or a business owner, that's different. And you take control and make decisions and kind of rise and fall based on the value and merit of what you decide you're going to do. And that's the point of a SSAS release, to give that full control of that structure to you, which is what most people want. Not everyone, but most.
That's cool. And you know what, just to make that hyper clear to anybody who's listening, probably the best example of a conventional pension that most of us dentists are familiar with is a SIP, self-invested personal pension. We also have the NHS pension as well, Paul, and that is like 4 to 5 hour long webinars or podcasts in and of itself, how that works. But suffice to say, in both those pensions, your money is tied up and you cannot get access to your capital until you hit pensionable age, whichever that is, depending on the terms of your NHS pension. Well, there's a few variances of that. And with the SIP, I believe it's currently 55, but it's soon to be 57 over the next few years, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. So that age is essentially a standard UK normal retirement date, as HMRC would describe it. So 55 is the current date that you can, or age so that you can take value from any pension in the UK, including SSAS or SIP. But it's rising to 57, I believe, in 2 years' time. Don't quote me again that year. I always forget the specific dates on that, but it's coming soon. And let's be frank, that will get higher, that number, as life expectancy increases and or the population ages. It's just a demographic that we can't control. So, but you're right. And the difference here, I guess, is, so maybe we should just look at that a little bit in detail, James, as well. So a SIP and a SSAS are quite often compared to each other, because a SIP does have a level of self-investment. That's the whole point of it, is a self-invested personal pension. It does have a level of that. It does give you and I, as the investor, some control, but it is limited. And the real difference there is a SSAS is a legal entity created in its own right for you. You own it and you are the members of it. And therefore, all decisions with what happens with the money belong to you. Whereas with a SIP, you're a member of someone else's structure. Again, nothing wrong with that. It's just what it is. And so you don't have the full control of it, and nor should you, because you don't actually own it. But with a SSAS, you do have that ownership and you do have that control. Yes, there are rules obviously determined by HMRC, but it's yours to control. A SIP is a personal pension designed for one person. A SSAS is a group structure designed for up to 11 people, to cooperate and collaborate in that same space. Each person still owns their own money, it's still their structure, but you have the ability to pool wealth together in a way that can be very productive. And for example, in a dental practice where maybe a number of owners in there, having the ability to bring that wealth together, which might be, for example, to acquire premises for the business or to acquire other businesses, can be particularly attractive because it's a really simple way of bringing a lot of that wealth together, and there's a natural collaboration here because you're already in business with these people already, so you're not kind of stepping out of the of the structure you're already comfortable with. So yeah, so SIPP and a SSAS are very different. The only thing a SIPP and a SSAS can do that's similar is they both can buy commercial premises, but that's pretty much it. And there's nothing really beyond that. And with a SIPP, that can be more challenging because a SIPP is regulated in a different way to a SSAS. And that regulator doesn't particularly like commercial property, and there are some rules and restrictions around it that make it a bit more challenging.
Fascinating. And you know what? I've got so many questions on what you've just said, how the investments are managed within the SSAS and what have you, as compared to SIPP and a few other things that you said just then as well. One question, just before we go any further, I was curious to know who specifically qualifies for a SSAS. Like, what will allow someone to open a SSAS? What prerequisites are there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, it's probably more straightforward than you might think. So the fundamental qualification is that you have a UK registered and active and trading limited company. So in other words, you're in business. So that basically gives you a right to apply to have a SSAS. And the application process is a relatively simple but a bit time-consuming process to have that SSAS application approved by HMRC. We do all that for you, by the way, but that's just part of the process. But to qualify for it, you have to have a company registered in the UK. It must be a trading company, not an investment company, and it must be active and have been active for at least 12 months, which, again, most people listening to this will automatically qualify for that. But even if you don't, you will qualify in time. So it's not like you have to have a particular qualification or be of a particular turnover or particular value in the SSAS. You just have to have a business that actually exists and is active and is actually trading. And that is pretty much everybody, because that's who you're listening, I guess, to the podcast. So yeah, quite straightforward in actual fact.
Well, dentists operate in an interesting place because even the people who do not necessarily own practice oftentimes have limited companies, because it makes sense for them for tax reasons to be able to have a little bit of discretion as to when they withdraw income from those limited companies, even when they're just self-employed and associate. In a practice, it may not, they want to stick to their 50K every single year, maybe their 100K, depending on what their lifestyle is like. Their 100K, what I mean by that is obviously the tax bands, of course, the income levels. But anyway, just to pull it back to what we were saying just a second ago. So I'm curious to know, the company has to be active to set up the SSAS. What happens if a company becomes inactive for whatever reason, like it goes bankrupt or broke?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Well, that's a good question. So I guess all that really means is that if you look at it in the kind of context, if these two parts, the company and the SSAS, are kind of cooperating as two gears, if you like, if one of them's not there, the other one still exists, but it just can't do as much as it did before. So if you have a SSAS, you still own it, it's still there, but you couldn't do some of the things that you could do previously because the company you'd have done it with doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So the ability to add money into it, the ability to, for example, borrow money from it, would dissipate until you add another company into it.
Okay.
And you may already have more than one company associated to it from the very beginning anyway, or indeed through time, because with a SSAS, you can have multiple companies connected to the same SSAS structure. And that isn't uncommon, where a load of my clients will have a trading business, maybe a consultancy business, maybe a property business, and all sorts of things that connect around that, and management companies and all sorts of things. So it's not uncommon. I might have a SSAS with 2 or 3, 4 or 5 businesses connected to the same SSAS structure, because there are different business structures, there are different sources of income, there's different reasons for having those structures there. So if one goes, for you might have retired, you might have sold it, you might have gone bankrupt, as you say, it's just these things happen, then it doesn't mean the SSAS ceases, it just means it's got less capacity to do something unless there's another company already connected to it, or you make. Good question though. I'm not often asked that question, actually, although I've been asked it a couple of times the last couple of weeks, which is interesting. So I don't know if that tells a bit about the UK.
That maybe that's something to do with the economic climate. There we go. It's kind of like percolating in people's mind. But no, I did think that to myself. I was like, oh, okay, how does that work? Okay, fascinating. So it's basically an independent vehicle from the company that's contributing towards it, and you can link more than one vehicle to it. You can link more than one entity to it in terms of a proper, or in terms of a business rather. Okay, cool. All right, fascinating. All right, so let's delve into the SaaS itself, like what actually happens in the SaaS, so to speak. So I'm guessing that you can invest, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this may be right, this may not be right, but correct me if I'm wrong. You can invest in pretty much anything that you could in your personal name or a company, except it's in this structure. Oh, and but actually, am I right in saying that? First of all, just before we go any further, have I got that right?
Mostly, yeah, I'll
Mostly,
just
yeah. I bet there's some little like caveats to that, which we'll get into. Actually, do you know what? Let's answer that first because I was going to
yeah,
come back to annual allowance and lifetime allowance and things like that, but we can do that afterwards.
yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think maybe the start point to answer that question is that a SaaS has the widest capacity or investment scope than any pension in the UK. So, to make a direct comparison, there is no pension that gives you more ability to have more choices of how you invest within a pension structure, and a SaaS has the widest capacity of all of those things. The only thing a UK pension cannot do normally on its kind of day-to-day routine, any UK pension, including SIPs and SSAS and personal pensions, is you cannot invest directly in residential property. There are structures that allow you to do it en masse in a portfolio structure and a much larger, kind of more complex place, but that's not for this discussion today. That's a much larger kind of discussion. But but generally speaking, a SaaS can invest in pretty much anything, but it just can't invest in residential property. It can invest in whatever you want to. So any investment fund, any structure, any platform, trackers, commodities, a whole range of things. It can invest in commercial property, it can invest in land, it can invest in businesses, it can buy shares, it can buy options, it can do all sorts of really clever things. And that in itself is quite a wide subject in its own. But the headlines, I guess, which is the point of this conversation today, is that it can do pretty much most things you want to do in a pension structure. In fact, probably most things you wouldn't have thought you could do within a pension structure. And I guess that's kind of the main point, is that because most of us are traditionally educated or indeed not educated by the way of the UK system in finance at all, and so therefore investment is usually something that we do passively because we just go with the flow and invest in that SIP or that pension structure we had before. We're just going to get into that because that's what we're used to. But a SaaS opens that door really and gives a load of freedom that you may not have thought was available to you. And some of those things, and I'll come on to that in a second, but one of the main things it can do, a SaaS, is lend money to your own limited company or limited companies. And that, for a load of people, is very, very interesting, because if you're about to embark upon a growth period or a marketing campaign or a recruitment campaign or trying to buy something, equipment or whatever it may be for your business, having the ability to access capital from your own source, from your own pension structure, is a little bit cool, because most people don't think you could do that. And where you have a pension might have, I don't know, 50 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand more in it. Having the ability to borrow from that to help you grow your business and grow your pension at the same time, well, is pretty cool. And most people, when you hear that, kind of almost don't believe it because they've never heard of it before and don't think it's possible. But I can assure you, everything we're talking about here is determined by HMRC's own rules. So this is not a fantasy or a fable or a story. It's we're just repeating what HMRC allow to happen in the pension structure. So having that ability to take that control to invest in what you want to, which includes your own business, for most people is a kind of a massive step. And particularly if you are ambitious enough to want to grow your business or maybe even to repay other finance or wherever that may be, then having that capacity is great. You can also lend to other people's companies as well if you want to, and there's different rules around that. And some people love doing that. I did that with my own SaaS, for example. But again, it's not for everybody. And maybe I should say as well before I get into this, SaaS is not for everybody. But for those that can see a way forward with it, it's a hugely powerful tool. If I speak to 100 people in a month, probably 45 or 50 of them are suitable for SaaS, another 25 are suitable later on, and 25 are just not right for it, for one reason or another. But it is not one size fits all, because it is a very distinct process for with an identified end game, if you like. So yeah, it's a big subject, SaaS, and I think the purpose of this conversation is to kind of just headline it.
And this is it. And I can feel my brain just trying to ask loads of questions about caveats. But what we should definitely do today is try to keep it high level, Paul, entry level for people who are learning about SSAS. Because I can
Yeah,
feel myself getting carried away. But what happens in this instance and what's the terms of the lending and stuff like that? Let's save that for a follow up podcast, shall we? Question
yeah,
popped into my head, a little bit of a wild card question. We say that you can invest in pretty much any asset within the SaaS that you could do in your personal name. But what about crypto?
yeah. I've asked that question a lot, and I'd love to give a different answer to this. But fundamentally, the great thing with crypto obviously is the value of it is well, it's high at the minute, but it's obviously had the capacity to be quite volatile, and that can be brilliant if you're on the low to the high. But the key thing with crypto is it doesn't have a traditional title structure to it. Because it is obviously blockchain and that's different. So actually a SaaS cannot directly own crypto because well it doesn't have a title to it and the value is too variable for it to kind of be comfortable with. But there are ways that it can indirectly. And this I guess this is half the thing with SaaS is that there's invariably a solution to a question that you will ask because it is such a flexible structure that it has the capacity to find a way to make something work. So a couple of things you could do there. For example, you could borrow money out of your SaaS into your company and your company could buy crypto. So there's a solution. Or there are crypto structures and substructures that SaaS could invest in. Again, well, just high level, I'll probably leave that there, but there are ways it can do it, but it's not by direct title to it because you can't have direct title to it, I guess. But yeah, good question. And I am asked that question a lot, as you might imagine.
That's cool, man. No, well, it's a bit like an ISA then, really, by the sounds of it, because not in so much the borrowing aspect, but what I mean is within an ISA you can purchase mining companies, and their prices tend to be correlated to the price of Bitcoin. Anyway, no financial advice is not what we're here to do today, but just sharing cool bits of wisdom that we've learned in our journeys, so to speak. So we wouldn't want everybody to rush off and do that. Certainly, just signposting that that's possible. Anyway, let's pull it back to the pension. Let's pull it back to the SaaS. How do the annual allowance and lifetime allowance, well, obviously lifetime allowance is gone now for the moment, watch this
Mm.
space, but how does annual allowance interact? How does that come into play whenever it comes to SaaS?
Yeah, so it's actually very different in SaaS space. I think one of the key things that maybe I should say at the start of the chat is that SaaS is a different kind of pension structure to a SIP or other types because it's actually regarded or classified as an occupational pension scheme, which gives it a different set of rules, a different regulatory structure, a whole kind of different regime sits around it. And one of the things that impacts on significantly is the ability to fund the SaaS on an annual basis. So you quite rightly said there, if the annual limit or the annual allowance limit is currently 60k for an individual to make a contribution or from their business into a personal pension, but with a SaaS, that limit is much higher.
Oh,
And a SaaS has a unique structure within it called a general fund. Again, just high level this that allows a business or a company to make a contribution much higher than the annual personal allowance and basically park that higher amount in this thing called the general fund, which means that you can pay up to £500,000 a year from your company or companies into the SaaS. That is tax deductible for corporation tax. The money will sit inside of the pension structure and be investable. And it's also sitting inside that structure, which is distinct from your company and therefore de-risked from having the cash sitting in your company, fully investable, but the money hasn't allocated to you personally because it'll still do that at the rate of 60 grand a year within the SaaS. Now that's starting to be a little bit technical, but the high level bit there is you put a lot more money into the SaaS. And I always say, and again, you quite rightly just put a caveat around a couple of things there, that is subject to an advisory or a guidance process. The rules allow all of that to happen, but from a prudence perspective or from a protection perspective, we always advocate getting that process underway with an advisory note from a professional who's qualified to give you that, and we can connect that all up for you. It's not an expensive thing to do, but it's just sensible to have a high contribution which is the tax deductible at 25%, which will save you 125 on corporation tax. If you're doing that, you want to have an advisory structure around that, make sure that it's been done properly and that all the rules and all the means have been tested to make sure that's been done in exactly the right format, and we can help you with that.
fascinating. And you see that right there? That's probably a whole podcast in itself, the ins and outs of that. You know that, because that's one of the most pertinent things and the biggest things that's going to be the decider, I feel, for a lot of people. So just to recap, just like a SIP, it comes out of your company's profits pre-corporation tax, right?
But
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay, there we go. Okay, cool, man. All right. And then lifetime allowance, I'm guessing that's similar
it's the same.
situation for
Yeah,
the
just the
the
same.
SIP.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so as you quite rightly said, James. I mean, at the minute there is no lifetime allowance, but without being, I'm not a gambler particularly, but I would take a bet that the UK government structure will change at some point in 2024. And if that happens, as expected, then the new government will most likely introduce or reintroduce a level of lifetime allowance. Don't know what that would be. I'd be a guessing man if I did. But previously, if we recall, when that allowance was introduced way back in the early 2000, 2006, I think it was, the limit was £1.8 million, and it has gradually reduced to £1.073 million when it was scrapped last year. So I'll take a guess at it, and I'll suggest that the figure would be something higher than it was, and maybe getting towards what it had been before, because or what they might do is separate out high earning NHS staff from that calculation, because that was the whole point of actually them scrapping the lifetime allowance at all, because too many people were exiting NHS at senior levels because they were basically forced to do so because the tax situation on the pension was just not productive, being polite. So that's why they changed it and scrapped it. But I think there'll be some addressing of that to come back. Again, though, because SSAS is a group structure, then that lifetime allowance is per person within that group.
Mm.
So it doesn't change it, but it just makes it a bit more easy to manage it. If there are 4 people in the SSAS, then you have 4 times that lifetime allowance within the SSAS. And also, just as a kind of, again, a big picture marker, there are pension structures beyond SSAS that can be looked upon. So if you get to a place where you are beyond the lifetime allowance, there are methods and processes and structures that can adapt to that. And so whilst it is a problem, it isn't a disaster. There are things that can be done beyond that, again, with proper guidance and proper planning and advice.
Cool, man. Thank you for that. Awesome. Well, like I say, I'm itching to ask an absolute ton of stuff on that, like the borrowing terms versus the value of the asset. I'd really love to know how that works. Let's save that as a podcast for another day. Let's just zoom out again once more. And thank you for all that technical information. We'll just resurface, go back up to the high level. I'm just curious, because why is it people talk about ISAs and SIPs all the flipping time, but why do they not talk about SSAS as frequently?
Yeah, and maybe my marketing's not as good as it should be. Maybe I should be getting. No, I mean, in all seriousness, it's a strange thing. So I think because SaaS is so connected to so if you're the SaaS, then that connects you, your business, your family, your wealth strategy, your pension, everything in one place, and people tend not to share all of the information too much on a kind of personal level. But actually, the fundamental thing, that the reason why SaaS hasn't been as popular as it might be, is that most accountants don't understand SaaS, and most accountants tend to shy away from talking about pensions and pension structures. And I can kind of understand that because they feel they're kind of venturing into uncharted territory and they maybe shouldn't be going down that road. And I kind of understand that to a degree. The kind of harder thing to understand is financial advisors, though, do know about SaaS in kind of generic high-level terms, but I think they fear SaaS a little bit because they essentially are giving the control of your finances back to you, which is like what their remit is. So it's a kind of I think a kind of contrarian view of that they probably should talk about SaaS in more detail. And some advisors do, of course, talk about SaaS, but they're very, very rare. Because most financial advisors want to retain the control of that money that you've got, because that's actually how they charge you. That's how they get you. Also, some advisors aren't allowed to venture into the SaaS space because the regulatory and insurance structures don't allow them to do that. And that's not, again, uncommon because most advisors work within large networks these days, and those networks tend to kind of dumb down a little bit what some advisors can do. So some are restricted. But put it in a context, in the UK, there's probably, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 million SIPs out there. I don't actually know the number, but it'll be millions for sure. There are, in comparison, only 22,000 SSASs. So it's very much a niche market. There's no real reason why it should be niche, and it's not like that. But actually, as I said at the start, SaaS does not suit everybody. So you need to see a need or a reason why you want to use it. You need to qualify for it. You need to be a company owner, which naturally reduces numbers anyway. And you need to have the ability to find that fully supported. And I guess that's one of the things that we do. We mentioned this, I spoke to James about this, that you can find information online about all sorts of things, but actually finding a process to carry that all the way through is quite difficult. And with SSAS, the information that's out there is very sporadic and it's very opinionated. So actually, some people probably look at it and think, do you know what, I don't know how to make that happen. And therefore maybe just don't actually proceed with the process because a SIP looks quite easy. You'll get a SIP today, it'll be done tomorrow, and it's kind of more straightforward. The SSAS is a bit more involved and requires more expertise, which is what we do, but actually finding us maybe it isn't that easy. but here we are, we're now visible, so we're here to help. But yeah, so there's loads of reasons why it isn't as prolific as it might be, but it's not for any other reason than it's just not that widely known.
There we are. Fascinating. And you know what? It's very true. And I have heard a lot of people throw around saying, "Oh, if it was too good to be true, and it sounds like it has too many perks." It probably is, and along those lines. And it's just like, okay, there are probably lots of things in the world that are like that, right? But equally, there are some things that are very beneficial and useful, and it's good to have an open mind. And just because something is just a little bit off the beaten track, well, there might be something fruitful in there. Should you learn about it and should you educate yourself, and then you can at least make an informed choice, which is what we're all about, and which is actually a huge part of Dennis Who Invest, a huge reason why I started it, and also a huge reason why we're doing this podcast today, which is long overdue on the subject of SSAS. Paul, you've been super generous with your time today. If anybody is listening to the Dennis Who Invest podcast and they want to find out more about you and what you do, where are they best off finding you?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm right here. So yeah, that's a great point. I guess maybe just going to box that off. So really my function is to provide, or my team is to provide a full pathway for people to get into that process, to get educated on SSAS, to understand what it means to support people through application and support them once they've got it, and then guide and strategize on when you actually have it existing. So we provide that full structure. But I am available very easily on my LinkedIn pages. I'm available on my website. I'm happy to share information here, or I don't know if you want to do that on a section later on in the podcast. But my website is quite simply SSAS Consultant, so that's SSAS-consultant.co.uk.
That's a cool piece of real estate right there for a website, mate. That's a really good searchable title. Anyway, you were saying.
It's there and exists. So
good, man.
I'm there, I'm online, there's a chat in place in there, there's ask questions online, you can ask me the question directly. So you'll find me on LinkedIn as SSAS Consultant. My name is Paul Barry, B-A-R-R-Y. So I'm there and I'm visible. I'm happy to help anyone who has genuine questions and an interest in SSAS, because this is what I do. So my particular role is in the early stages of the SSAS discovery journey, really helping people to be educated on it and to guide them on the uses of it. And I guess to kind of coach people into whether one, it is suitable for you or not generically, whether you can see a use for it, can you understand it and see a way forward, and if you can, we'll help you in that whole process and create a pathway for you going forward. But yeah, I'm here, I'm happy to help, and delighted to have a conversation with you, and it's been great to have that chat, James, appreciate it. And I'll be delighted to have a chat with anybody who's listening and see how you can help them out.
That's totally cool, mate. And one thing you mentioned to me, which we never actually really got around to talking about on this podcast, you are a former financial advisor, right? And you're now branched into this realm. So you see the entire field of play whenever it comes to this stuff. You've literally sat in that chair as an advisor and understood the reasons why maybe it isn't discussed as frequently as it should be. So that's the angle that you're coming at this from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was an advisor from the mid-90s to, I can't remember, 2010, I think it was, 9. I used SSAS back in the 90s because I had clients who were all business owners who wanted to do more than just invest money in a standard structure. And that's why I branched into SSAS, because it was obvious to me that to keep those clients productively engaged with me, then I had to do something more than just give them a standard off-the-pad structure. And that's what SSAS was. I have some great stories about some clients who save their business or grew their business or maximize the growth of their business and manage tax and all sorts of clever things simply because they had a structure that suited them. And I think that's a key point, that SSAS was designed SSAS is the only pension structure designed for SME business owners. The other ones, they're not unsuitable, but they weren't specifically designed for a business owner. And that, I think, is the kind of the message to bear in mind. And that's how I got into SSAS, because it was obvious to me there's a niche there and a need for it. And pulling a process together to help people to get to that point was, well, that's what I do. And it works.
And what a lovely note to end this podcast on today, Paul. We're going to get you back on the podcast beg your pardon. We're going to get you back on the podcast super soon so we can do another episode. Thank you for a wonderful episode today. Lots to learn and take in for the dentist, I'm sure, who are listening, and for myself as well, because SSAS is not something I knew a great deal about. Now I'm feeling that much more enlightened, which is wonderful, and I'm certainly looking forward to future episodes. Paul, I hope you have an absolutely smashing day, and we'll see each other very soon.
James, Andrew, thank you very much.